The silent music accumulation. The galactic assembly hall stretched across 3 km of polished crystalline music. Floor, its domed ceiling displaying a real-time map of charted space, 200 species gathered here monthly to discuss trade agreements, territorial disputes, and the countless bureaucratic matters that kept civilization functioning. Across 1,000 star systems, the hall hummed with translated voices, each species speaking their native tongue, while translation matrices converted everything into comprehensible language. For all attendees, Dr. Sarah Chin sat in Section 73, Row 12, Seat 47. The human delegation occupied exactly 6 seats in a chamber designed for 5,000. Their section was located near the waste recycling processors, a placement that every species understood as deliberate. Humanity had been granted observer status in the assembly 17 years ago, and in all that time their seating assignment had never improved. Sarah had stopped requesting better accommodations. After the first year, some battles were not worth fighting, and comfort was never her priority. She was 42 years old, though she looked younger by galactic standards. Most species assumed humans aged rapidly due to their short lifespans, but the truth was more complicated. Earth's harsh environment had created a species that matured quickly and burned bright. Sarah had learned 11 alien languages, earned 3 advanced degrees in xenocultural studies, and spent the last decade studying every species in the assembly with the focus of someone who knew knowledge was the only weapon her people possessed. Today's session concerned mineral rights in the Cath Expanse, a region of unclaimed space rich in rare elements. The Velcrin Empire wanted exclusive mining access. The Drathian collective claimed historical precedent. Both species were titans of the assembly, civilizations that had conquered space while humans were still discovering fire. Their fleets numbered in the thousands. Their technology was refined over millennia. Their confidence was absolute. Ambassador Thelkar of the Velcrin Empire stood at the central podium, his forearms spread wide in a gesture of magnanimous authority. The Velcrin were massive beings, each standing nearly 4 meters tall, with exoskeletons that gleamed like burnished copper. They had ruled their sector for 6,000 years and considered themselves the natural leaders of galactic civilization. The Scar's voice resonated through the hall with practiced dominance. The Korath Expanse represents an opportunity for responsible development, he declared. The Velcron Empire has the resources, the expertise, and the vision to extract these materials efficiently while maintaining ecological balance. We propose a 90 exclusive contract with profit sharing for assembly members in good standing. The Drathian representative, High Counselor Viren, rose from her seat with fluid grace. The Drathians were tall and slender, their silvery skin covered in bioluminescent patterns that shifted with their emotions. Currently, Veruan's patterns showed amber and gold, colors that indicated measured disagreement. Her species had mastered genetic engineering and biotechnology centuries before most others had left their home planets. The Velcrons speak of responsibility while ignoring that. Drathian survey ships mapped the Karath Expanse 200 years ago, Vronin said smoothly. Historical precedent grants us primary consideration. We propose a joint development agreement with the Velcrin as junior partners. subject to Drathian oversight. Sarah watched the exchange with the patience she had cultivated over years of being invisible. She knew what was coming next. Because it always came, the two powers would debate, threaten, and eventually compromise, carving up the expanse between them while smaller species received token considerations. It was the way the galaxy worked, the natural order established by strength and maintained by tradition. What made today different was that humanity had discovered the core expanse first. 3 years ago, the human survey ship Melon had been conducting long-range scans. When they identified the mineral deposits, Captain Rodriguez had filed the discovery with Earth's Ministry of Space Exploration, and the information had been quietly stored in databases that few people accessed. Humanity had learned early that announcing discoveries only invited stronger species to claim them. Better to remain quiet, to document everything, and to wait for opportunities. Sarah had been waiting for this moment, watching as both the Velcrin and Drathians independently discovered the expanse. In the following years, she had observed their survey missions, noting their methods and their blind spots. She had compiled detailed reports on their mining techniques, their corporate structures, and their legal frameworks. Most importantly, she had documented every instance where they had claimed discoveries that others had found first. The pattern was clear to anyone willing to look. The powerful species of the assembly had built their dominance partly through legitimate achievement and partly through systematic appropriation of others' work. Ambassador Felskar was gesturing broadly now, his confidence absolute. The Drathian claim of historical mapping is irrelevant. Mapping does not establish ownership. The Velcrin Empire has the actual capability to develop this region. We have the mining platforms, the processing facilities, and the distribution networks already in place. Granting access to anyone else would be inefficient and wasteful. Sarah pressed a button on her data tablet, sending a formal request to speak. The request appeared on the session monitor along with hundreds of others from minor species hoping to contribute to the discussion. Most would be ignored. The session moderator, a Theon named Sior Zeiss, typically only acknowledged the top 20 species in the assembly hierarchy. Humanity ranked 147th, but something unusual happened. Sir Eyes, a being that resembled an upright mantis with crystalline wings, paused while reviewing the speaking queue. His compound eyes flickered as he read Sarah's request title: Prior Discovery, Documentation, Karath Expanse. There was a moment of hesitation, then Sior Ziza's translator voice echoed through the hall. The chair recognizes Dr. Sarah Chin of Earth's delegation. For a brief statement, the hall fell silent, not the attentive silence of important moments, but the puzzled silence of routine disruption. Several species turned to look at the human section with what Sarah's translation matrix rendered as confused curiosity. The Velcron ambassador's forearms dropped slightly, his posture suggesting mild annoyance at the interruption. Sarah stood and walked to the designated speaking platform for minor species, a small podium located at floor level rather than the elevated central stage reserved for major powers. She carried a single data tablet and wore the simple gray uniform that Earth's diplomatic corps had adopted. Practical clothing designed for function, rather than impression. As she walked, she was acutely aware of the eyes, watching her, assessing her, dismissing her. She had felt this dismissal for years, this casual assumption that humans were insignificant. She had endured jokes about Earth's primitive history, comments about humanity's late arrival to galactic civilization, and countless subtle reminders that her species was tolerated rather than respected. The Velcron had once compared human technology to children's toys. The Drathians had published scientific papers questioning whether Earth qualified as a true civilization world. Given its violent history and tribal conflicts, every slight had been documented, every insult had been remembered, not out of bitterness but out of necessity. Sarah had learned that the galaxy's arrogance was both its strength and its weakness. Powerful species had grown so accustomed to dominance that they had stopped considering alternatives. They had forgotten that intelligence took many forms and that survival taught lessons that comfort never could. Sarah reached the podium and looked up at the assembled species. She could see Thelkar's 4 eyes regarding her with barely concealed impatience. She could see Varen's bioluminescent patterns shifting to pale blue, the Drathian color for dismissive tolerance. She could see dozens of other species waiting for her to finish speaking so important matters could resume. Honored delegates, Sarah began, her voice steady and clear, I wish to present evidence that may be relevant to this discussion. 3 years, 7 months, and 12 days ago, the human survey vessel Melon conducted mineral analysis of the Cath expanse as part of our ongoing deep space exploration program. The findings were logged with Earth's Ministry of Space Exploration and transmitted to the Assembly's public database per standard protocols. There was a ripple of movement through the hall, the equivalent of polite skepticism. Ambassador Thelskar's translator voice cut through the murmur. The human makes an interesting claim, he said, his tone dripping with condescension. However, simple detection does not establish development rights. Many species have detected many things. The question is, who has the capability to act on such detections? Humanity operates what, 200 ships in total. The Velcran Empire maintains 12,000 mining vessels alone. This discussion concerns practical reality, not theoretical discoveries. Sarah nodded as if acknowledging his point. The ambassador makes a valid distinction. I am not claiming development rights for humanity. We lack the infrastructure for such an undertaking. As the ambassador correctly notes, I am simply providing relevant historical context. The Assembly's own charter states that discovery information should be shared among all member species to facilitate informed decision-making. She tapped her data tablet in the hall's central display screen. Activated. A detailed star map appeared showing the Cath expanse with overlaid survey data. Timestamps were clearly visible, showing the Melon scans dated years before either the Velcran or Drathian missions. As you can see, the human survey included comprehensive mineral analysis, gravitational mapping, and hazard assessment. All of this data has been available in the public database for over 3 years. Any species could have accessed it at any time. High Counselor Venon's pattern shifted to dark red. The Drathian expression of irritation is the human suggesting that the Velcran or Drathian expedition somehow relied on human data That is absurd. Our survey technologies are centuries more advanced than anything Earth possesses. Sarah maintained her calm expression. I suggest nothing high. Counselor, I simply present facts. Data exists. The timestamps are verifiable. What conclusions others draw from these facts is not my concern. What? Sarah did not say. What she carefully avoided stating directly was that both the Velcrin and Drathian surveys had focused on precisely the same mineral deposits that the Melon had identified as most valuable. Both had used approach vectors that avoided the gravitation anomalies that the Melon's data had flagged as dangerous. Both had somehow known exactly where to look in a region spanning 12 cubic light years. The coincidence was remarkable. The explanation was obvious. Ambassador Thelkar's forearms crossed in a gesture of dismissal. This is pointless speculation from a species desperate for relevance. The human delegation waste the assembly's time with trivial historical footnotes while important negotiations are underway. I move that we resume substantive discussions and table this distraction. Several major species signaled agreement. The Cath expanse would be divided between the Velcrin and Drathians as everyone had expected. Humanity would return to its seats near the waste processors. The galaxy would continue turning as it always had, with the strong claiming what they wished and the weak accepting what they were given. Sarah looked out at the assembly one more time. She saw the dismissal in their eyes, the casual contempt that powerful beings reserved for those they considered beneath notice. She saw Thelkar already turning away, confident that the interruption was over. She saw VRN's patterns returning to neutral colors, the matter already forgotten. She saw none of them understood what had just happened. The data she had presented was not a protest or a complaint. It was a marker, a reference point that would become important later. Sarah had spent years studying how the assembly operated, and she had learned its most important rule. Precedent was everything. By formally documenting humanity's prior discovery in an official assembly session, she had created a legal record that could not be erased or ignored. More importantly, she had demonstrated that humanity was watching, documenting, and remembering. As Sarah returned to her seat, she thought about the reports waiting on her. Encrypted data tablet, reports about Velcron military logistics that were less efficient than they appeared. Reports about Drathian biotechnology that carried hidden vulnerabilities. Reports about dozens of species who had built their power on assumptions that had never been seriously tested. Earth's sun was a yellow dwarf, unremarkable by galactic standards. Its third planet was a world of extreme weather, tectonic instability, and atmospheric violence. Life there had evolved under constant pressure, adapting to ice ages and impact events, learning to survive conditions that more stable worlds never experienced. Humanity had emerged from that crucible carrying advantages that comfortable civilizations could not comprehend. They called Earth a death world, and they were right. They just did not understand what that meant. Sarah opened her tablet and began typing a message to Earth's Ministry of Defense. The subject line was simple: recommend accelerating Project Homestead. Timeline: the galaxy has shown its hand. The Velcrin and Drathians would divide the Cath expanse. They would extract its resources and congratulate themselves on another successful negotiation. They would never notice the human mining stations being constructed in 12 other unclaimed regions using techniques developed in Earth's harsh environments that made Velcron technology look primitive by comparison. The galaxy had spent years teaching humanity an important lesson. Strength was not just about ships and weapons. Real strength was about patience, preparation, and understanding your opponents better than they understood themselves. The Deathworlders had been watching, learning and waiting. The wait was almost over. The reckoning unveiled. The Velcron mining fleet arrived at the Cath Expanse 47 days after the assembly vote. 18 massive extraction platforms, accompanied by 32 support vessels and a dozen military escorts, formed an impressive display of industrial power. Admiral Cathron commanded the operation. From the flagship Dominance, a vessel so large it generated its own gravitational field, the Velcron had invested heavily in this venture, expecting the mineral wealth to fund their expansion programs. For the next century, what they found waiting for them changed everything. 3 human vessels floated in stationary orbit around the primary extraction zone. They were small ships. By Velcron standards, each barely the size of a Velcron support craft. They made no aggressive moves, transmitted no warnings, and showed no signs of departure. They simply waited their presence and unexpected complication in what should have been a routine deployment. Admiral Cathron studied the human ships with growing irritation. His tactical officer had identified them as Darwin-class survey vessels, lightly armed and designed for scientific research rather than combat. The Admiral's first instinct was to order them to leave immediately, but assembly protocols required diplomatic contact before military action against member species. He activated the communication channel with barely restrained impatience. Human vessels, this is Admiral Kron of the Velcron Imperial Fleet. You are present in a region that has been legally allocated to Velcron development through proper assembly procedures. Your presence here constitutes interference with authorized operations. Depart immediately or face consequences. The response came after a deliberate pause, the kind of silence that suggested careful consideration rather than communication delay. When the voice finally spoke, it was calm and unhurried, translated through standard galactic protocols, but retaining an underlying quality that the Admiral found unsettling. Admiral Cathron, this is Commander Marcus Webb of the Earth Survey Corps. We acknowledge your development rights in the Cath Expanse, as established by Assembly Vote 73. However, our vessels are currently positioned in Survey Grid 17, which falls 300,000 km outside your designated extraction boundary. We are conducting scientific research in unclaimed space and are not interfering with your operations. Cathron pulled up the boundary maps on his display. The human was technically correct. The Assembly had granted Velcron rights to specific mineral-rich zones, but not to the entire region. The humans had positioned themselves just beyond the legal boundary, a detail that would have been irrelevant if they had been any other species, but humans had demonstrated an annoying tendency to understand legal frameworks with uncomfortable precision. Your presence is still unwelcome, Cathron replied, his forearms gesturing in frustration that the human could not see, but his crew understood perfectly. The Velcron Empire requires operational security for our mining activities. I strongly suggest you relocate your research to another system. We appreciate your suggestion, Admiral. Commander Webb responded with that same measured calm. However, our current research cannot be easily relocated. We are studying gravitational interactions between binary neutron stars in this region. The phenomenon is quite unique. I am certain you understand the importance of scientific inquiry. The Velcron Empire has produced many distinguished scientists over your impressive history. The flattery was obvious, but Cathron noted the underlying message. The humans were not leaving, and they were doing so while remaining technically within their rights. It was a minor inconvenience, nothing more. The Admiral decided to ignore them and proceed with deployment. 3 small research vessels could not possibly interfere with a major industrial operation. That assessment proved incorrect. Within 72 hours, the first Velcron extraction platform activated its drilling systems and immediately encountered problems. The mineral seams that surveys had identified as accessible were proving far more difficult to reach than anticipated. Equipment malfunctioned at unprecedented rates. Drilling mechanisms that should have functioned for months required replacement after days. The platform's AI systems reported gravitation anomalies that interfered with precision operations, fluctuations that had not appeared in any previous surveys. Second platform experienced similar issues, then the third within a week. The entire Velcron operation was running at 30% efficiency, burning through equipment reserves and falling drastically behind schedule. Admiral Cathron reviewed the reports with mounting frustration, unable to understand what had gone wrong. The Velcron had mined asteroids and planets across a dozen sectors using these exact techniques. The technology was proven and reliable. Commander Webb contacted the Velcron flagship on the 8th day with an offer of assistance. Admiral, we could not help but notice you are experiencing difficulties, Webb said, his tone professionally sympathetic. Our gravitational research has revealed some unusual properties in this region that may be affecting your operations. The binary neutron stars create cascading tidal effects that shift unpredictably. We have developed some compensatory algorithms that might prove useful. We would be happy to share our data. Kron's pride weared with practicality. Accepting help from humans would be humiliating, but the operation was hemorrhaging resources at an unsustainable rate. He made the pragmatic choice and agreed to review the human data. The algorithms the humans provided were elegant and effective. They accounted for gravitational variables that Velcron systems had completely missed, compensating for fluctuations with a precision that seemed almost prescient. Within 48 hours of implementing the human solutions, extraction efficiency increased to 70%. It was still below projections, but it was manageable. What Admiral Cathron did not know, what none of the Velcron understood, was that Commander Webb's team had not discovered the gravitational anomalies through research. They had created them. The 3 human vessels were not survey ships in any conventional sense. They were mobile gravity manipulation platforms, technology that humanity had developed during their colonization of Jupiter's moons, where extreme gravitational environments required Innovative solutions. The humans have been systematically disrupting Velcron operations while appearing to be innocent bystanders, then offering solutions to problems they had deliberately caused back on Earth in a secure facility buried beneath the Colorado Rockies. Dr. Sarah Chin watched the operation unfold through encrypted channels. She sat in a conference room with representatives from Earth's Ministry of Defense, the Space Exploration Directorate, and the newly formed Office of Galactic Strategy. The wall display showed real-time data from the Catholic Expanse and 16 other locations where human operations were quietly proceeding. The Velcron are dependent on our algorithms now, reported General Patricia Rodriguez, the head of Space Defense Operations. Every adjustment they make relies on our data. They think they are compensating for natural phenomena, but they are actually calibrating their systems to our specifications. And the Drathian, Sarah asked, knowing their operation in the other half of the Catholic Expanse was equally important, experiencing similar issues. Rodriguez replied with a slight smile, though their problems are biological rather than mechanical. Turns out the Expanse has some unique microorganisms that interfere with Drathian biotechnology. Remarkable coincidence that human sterilization techniques happen to be particularly effective against these organisms. Sarah nodded, understanding the unspoken truth. The microorganisms were not native to the Expanse. They had been introduced by human biological warfare specialists who had studied Drathian technology for years, identifying weaknesses that the Drathians themselves did not know existed. Like the Velker, the Drathians were now dependent on human assistance to make their operation viable. The strategy was called necessary dependence, and it represented humanity's answer to a fundamental problem. Earth could not match the established powers and military strength or industrial capacity. Humanity had neither the numbers nor the resources to compete directly with civilizations that had been developing for millennia. But humans had something else, something that species from stable, comfortable worlds had never needed to develop. They had the ability to thrive in impossible conditions and to find advantages in situations that others viewed as obstacles. Earth was a world where survival required constant adaptation. Its atmosphere had changed repeatedly over billions of years. Its climate had swung from frozen wasteland to tropical greenhouse. Its tectonic plates shifted and collided, destroying civilizations and forcing survivors to rebuild. Repeatedly, humanity had evolved in an environment that punished weakness and rewarded flexibility, learning to see every challenge as an opportunity rather than an obstacle. Phase 2 is ready to proceed, announced Director Chinny of the Office of Galactic Strategy. He was Sarah's uncle, a former military strategist who had spent his career studying asymmetric warfare. We have identified 63 additional regions. Major species have development interests. In each case, we can offer technical solutions to environmental challenges, always positioning ourselves as helpful junior partners rather than competitors. Sarah considered the implications. Humanity was not trying to conquer the galaxy or replace the existing power structure. That would be impossible and ultimately self-defeating. Instead, they were making themselves indispensable, creating situations where the dominant species needed human expertise to achieve their own goals. It was a strategy as old as human civilization. The approach of weaker powers throughout Earth's history who had survived by making themselves valuable to stronger neighbors. What about the assembly? Sarah asked. The major species will eventually notice the pattern. Let them notice, Director Chin replied. By the time they understand what is happening, the dependencies will be too valuable to abandon. The Velcron need our gravitational algorithms. The Drathians need our biological expertise. Within 5 years, we estimate that 40% of major industrial operations will rely on human technical support in some capacity. You cannot easily break away from a species that keeps your economy functioning. The meeting continued for another hour, reviewing operations across dozens of systems. Human mining stations were extracting resources in regions that other species had deemed too dangerous or unprofitable. Human agricultural specialists were developing food production techniques in harsh environments where conventional methods failed. Human engineers were solving infrastructure problems that had frustrated galactic civilizations for centuries. In every case, humanity was demonstrating capabilities that comfortable species had never needed to develop. 3 months after the Cath expanse operation began, Ambassador Thelskar requested a private meeting with Dr. Sarah Chin. They met in a neutral conference facility on Accord Station, a diplomatic outpost that served as a secondary meeting location for assembly business. The Velcrin ambassadors' forearms were held in a position that Sarah's cultural training identified as reluctant respect, a posture that Velcron only adopted when acknowledging uncomfortable truths. Dr. Chin, Thelkar, began, his translator rendering his tone as carefully neutral. The Velcron Empire wishes to discuss expanded cooperation with Earth in several technical areas. We have been impressed by your species' problem-solving approaches in the Koreth expanse. Sarah maintained her expression of polite attention, revealing nothing. The Velcron Empire's recognition is appreciated. Ambassador, humanity is always interested in mutually beneficial cooperation. Indeed, Thelkar continued, and Sarah detected something in his body language that suggested internal conflict. I must confess that the Velcron leadership has undertaken a reassessment of our previous evaluations regarding human capabilities. We may have been too hasty in our initial judgments. It was as close to an apology as the Velcron were capable of offering. Sarah knew that accepting it gracefully would open doors that confrontation never could. Ambassador, every species views others through the lens of their own experience. The Velcron Empire has achieved greatness through strength and direct action. Earth has achieved survival through adaptation and indirect solutions. Neither approach is superior. They are simply different, and difference can be valuable when properly respected. Velkar's arms shifted to a position of consideration. Your perspective is more generous than we perhaps deserve. I am authorized to offer Earth expanded representation in the Assembly. Your seating assignment will be upgraded to Section 20, and your voting weight will be increased to reflect your technical contributions to ongoing development projects. Section 20 was where species with real influence sat, far from the waste processors and the casual dismissal. Sarah felt a moment of satisfaction, but she was careful not to show it. Earth accepts this recognition. With gratitude, we look forward to contributing more substantially to assembly deliberations. The meeting concluded with formal pleasantries, but Sarah understood what had truly transpired. The Velcron Empire, one of the galaxy's dominant powers, had acknowledged that humanity could not be ignored. More importantly, they had done so not because humans had threatened them or competed with them, but because humans had made themselves necessary. The Deathworlders had proven they belonged in the galaxy, not by matching the strength of older civilizations, but by offering capabilities that older civilizations lacked. That evening, Sarah stood in her quarters on a cord station and looked out at the stars. Somewhere among those lights was Earth, a small blue world orbiting an unremarkable sun in a relatively empty region of space. It was a world that had tried to kill humanity 1,000 different ways, through ice ages and asteroid impacts, through plagues and natural disasters, through every harsh test that an unforgiving universe could devise. And humanity had survived them all, learning lessons that comfortable species never needed to learn. The galaxy had mocked the Deathworlders, viewing them as primitive latecomers who would never truly matter in the grand civilizations that older species had built. But the galaxy had not understood what being from a death world meant. It meant that humans saw challenges where others saw impossibilities. It meant that humans thrived in conditions that made other species falter. Most importantly, it meant that humans understood a fundamental truth that comfortable species had forgotten. Survival was not about being the strongest or the oldest or the most technologically advanced. Survival was about being adaptable, resourceful, and willing to find advantages in situations that others viewed as hopeless. Earth had taught humanity those lessons over millions of years, and now humanity was teaching them to the galaxy. Sarah activated her communication terminal and composed a message to Earth's Ministry of Defense. The subject line was simple: Phase 2 approved. Continue expansion. The galaxy is learning. In mining operations across 20 star systems, human technical specialists were solving problems that had frustrated galactic civilizations. In diplomatic chambers throughout the assembly, human representatives were building relationships based on mutual benefit rather than military strength. In research facilities on Earth and its colonies, human scientists were developing technologies specifically designed to address challenges that comfortable species had never encountered. The Deathworlders were not conquering the galaxy, they were becoming essential to it, weaving themselves into the fabric of galactic civilization so thoroughly that their absence would be felt in every major operation and every significant undertaking. It was a victory that would never be celebrated with military parades or triumphant announcements. It was quiet, subtle, and absolutely unstoppable. The Velcron Empire had learned respect. The Drayan Collective would follow soon. One by one, the species that had dismissed humanity would discover that the quiet observers from the death world possessed advantages that millennia of comfortable existence could never provide. The galaxy had mocked them, underestimated them, and relegated them to the margins of civilized space. The galaxy had made a mistake, and now slowly but inevitably The galaxy was learning what happens when you ignore the survivors of a world that never stops testing its children. The Deathworlders had arrived, not with fleets and weapons, but with patience, capability, and the hard-earned wisdom of a species that had learned to turn every disadvantage into strength. The assembly would never be the same, neither would the galaxy. And Earth, that small blue death world that had seemed so insignificant, would be remembered as the place where everything changed, not through conquest or domination, but through the simple, undeniable demonstration that survival teaches lessons that comfort never can. The stars shone in the darkness outside Sarah's window, and among them, humanity's future burned brighter than ever before.